CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. There he is, folks. That's George Williams. He's with ReliabilityX. He is the man. He's a real deal pro. Don't listen to him. Listen to me, because I know. George, welcome back to CMMS Radio, brother.
Greg, man. It was awesome to see you again, as always.
Yeah, man. By the way, fantastic hanging out with you down at Streamline conferences when we were down in Greenville. We got a nice little episode recorded. I got to sit through what I feel like is one of my favorite presentations in a long, long time because of the way it was stitched together. So I just wanted to remind you, it was great hanging out, but that presentation was something, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I take a lot of pride in matching the message to the event. And so, when we do keynote addresses or companies approach us about speaking at their individual events, we do a lot of, what's the theme about? What's this, what do you want the message to be? What do you want people to leave with? Not only like education wise, but emotionally, like how do you want them to leave the room? So we take a lot of pride in putting stuff together that matches all those aspects. The easy part is weaving in the reliability stuff because we know that in and out, right? But how do you formulate it into a message that matches what the event is, matches what the audience is, and what the expectations of the event organizers are? And so we do our best.
Yeah, I think there's at least one particular secret to that, how that can actually happen, why and how you're able to do it. Aside from skills and merit and things you've learned and failures you've had, all you really have to do, maybe this is oversimplifying, you have to care. You have to have intention. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's a true statement, Greg.
So I'm going to transition us into kind of a topic. You and I were visiting a little bit today. We stay in touch all the time. Everybody knows this at this point. If they don't, they should. I'm fascinated by this thing we struggle with over the years and what we see in recent years when it comes to the idea of accountability in maintenance, organizational leadership, plant floor, all the way to the janitorial closet, all the way to the boardroom. And there's some differences out there because we've talked about several companies since I've known you that are really doing it right. That takes effort. It's not easy to do. But the way they achieve that seems to be through accountability. Whereas other companies, they might be big, they might be profitable, they might be well respected, but they don't have that level of accountability across teams. I want to get into that a little bit with you today because I think it's a missing component from what we all, not just, you and I, but like everybody is struggling with this accountability because without it, you can't possibly know what you're going to get. It's all over the board. Talk to me about that.
Oh, wow. The differences I see between companies that are successful organizations and I don't mean they make money, meaning success, because lots of, like you had alluded to, companies make money even if they're terrible at producing. Companies that are at, 40, 50% OEE, they're still making money. It's just that you pay more on the shelf for the product, right? They're still going to make their profit. And so what I mean by success, and I think what you're alluding to by success, is the cultural aspects, the internal workings. How do they ensure things are operating well, right? Not just make money. And I think I think accountability is an interesting topic because it's really two pieces to that. The first one, and the one that's most critical, is self-accountability. You have to hold yourself accountable first. It's really hard to hold other people accountable if you're not holding yourself accountable. And people don't like to hold themselves accountable. People like to be able to, I guess the difference between a job and a career, right? Like you just show up to work. That's one thing. I show up to work, I get my pay. And at the end of the day, those folks that feel like, the company doesn't care about me, so what do I care? Maybe they're not wrong. Maybe there's a lot of reasoning behind that, right? The company's not showing up to your funeral, not in most cases. So they're not entirely wrong. But what is missing there is just the passion of what you do every day and the love of what you do every day that creates and helps you create self-accountability, irregardless of how the company feels about you and your performance, or you as a number versus a human. And I think that self-accountability piece and that self-desire and passion for what you do every day makes a difference. So if that doesn't exist, the other companies, the company itself will struggle in how to hold you accountable, because, well, you're not even self-accountable. So how are you going to hold other people accountable or manage other people and all those aspects, right? So that's one piece to it. And then I think the other piece to it is the structure of accountability in the organizations that are extremely successful. You don't go into big multi-billion-dollar companies and find that there aren't documented processes. You don't find that there's not a mechanism, an actual structure to accountability. For example, let's say I'm trying to get through to my manager on an idea and I'm not getting anywhere. In those environments, it's perfectly acceptable after I've tried a couple times to go to my one-over manager. And in an organization where that structure doesn't exist, that becomes you went behind my back thing. And instead of you tried the path, it didn't work, so now you're going to go to another path. If it doesn't work there, then you got your answer and you move on. But if that structure doesn't exist, it can be taken differently by the person you circumvent. You didn't really circumvent them. You asked them 3 times and you didn't get any input the way you liked it. So you wanted to try another avenue to make sure that either your idea wasn't what it was supposed to be, or, it does get, some support. If that formalized mechanism doesn't exist, the structure doesn't exist, then that can be like, hey, you stabbed me in the back. And then that's a cultural thing. And I think organizations that put structure around decision-making and accountability are much more successful than the ones that don't. And the ones that don't, oftentimes it's because, well, it just didn't exist and the company grew. And it was never something we got to. We didn't have time to do it because the next product comes out, the next line goes in, for whatever reason, it wasn't worth putting that structure in place. Well, and they struggle for it. I think there's a lot of value to having that structure.
I wonder what the difference is when it comes to the organizations, whether they did that from the start and created those systems of accountability that were enforced. And I don't mean that as like an overbearing thing, more of this is a part of how we operate. When people join our organization, they are literally indoctrinated into that system of operation, because now every one of those people has this opportunity to show up in their role with express expectations, as opposed to all the guesswork we see in the other organizations. And you mentioned something about how, well, we don't have time for that. We're too busy with new product, and then we got 2 more behind it, and then we got this and we got that. Those are very real things that we all struggle with. So sometimes our people in our organizations, even leadership, they sometimes have to say, need to do it, can't do it. We just got to keep going. And it's a reality, and it's also kind of sad, because they're then willfully saying, all right, the lesser of 2 evils is going to be to not fix a huge problem, because this thing over here, maybe based on how we're perceived within the organization, is going to be more important for me to maybe stay relevant. So that's another thing that I think comes up a lot in conversations with all of our different brethren. Our brothers and sisters throughout industry are always talking about this idea of how we're measured influences how we behave. And we don't have these opportunities to even be creative to solve solutions and get together as a team, because number one, the time, can't create the time gap, right? That's you'll never recover. Yep. And people also don't know how to accept that they're not being accountable enough. And it's really hard. It reminds me of vocation. People that have a vocation, like almost like you have no choice but to do this because you choose that you must do this, right? You owe it to the world. That's that kind of career trajectory you're talking about, where You get enough of those people in an organization, even if there's people that aren't like that, they can hold it together and inspire and kind of, hey, these gaps aren't quite as bad. Have you ever affected a change like that in an environment where you had some of those people that were really all about it from a vocation perspective,
Oh
and you
yeah.
leveraged them to kind of carry the weight of the others?
Yeah, you have to. You have for any change, right? There's going to be people that pick up the ball and run, and there's going to be people that try to stop you from doing that. People play offense and they play defense, so that's always in existence, and it's part of the game. So you learn how to deal with that. I think interestingly, a couple of things that you had pointed out. One is the ignorance of an organization. Sometimes they just don't know that it could be better if that structure existed, right? So it's not necessarily through malicious intent that the structure doesn't exist. Maybe they've never been in an organization where that structure existed and saw the difference between what good looked like and where they may currently find themselves. And so I think that's an important piece. The other piece is people love structure, but just not when it's theirs. I was having a conversation today while teaching a class, and one of the topics of discussion was actually accountability on certain things. And so if you go into any manufacturing plant, you'll find that they had all these lean initiatives and these CI improvements where they're telling an operator this goes here and it goes in this paint, and you walk from here and you go to there and you do this and then you do that and then you touch this button and then you do this. And they almost treat them like they're not human. But they would never want their manager to structure their day that way. Like if you're not an operator on the plant floor, no one is saying your coffee cup goes in this circle. You will go and get coffee at this time. You'll walk in this direction. You'll turn right. You'll press this button. This is how you make the coffee. You bring it back to your desk. You must take a sip every X number of minutes. No one structures your day like that, but we do that to the plant floor all the time. Instead of educating them on how the line operates, we're dictating every single motion because we don't trust them as human beings. And we would never accept that level of forceful accountability on our own position. Yet we expect that when it comes to the shop floor. And there's a variety of reasons why some of that exists. But if we expect, I guess we expect in the office environment that self-accountability exists everywhere, and it just doesn't. And somewhere in between dictating every motion of you and having zero accountability is a sweet spot. And we need to find where that sweet spot is, right? We need to find where there are certain things that need to be structured. How we make decisions as a company, the fact that you'll show up to your meetings on time, that stuff is structured environment. But not like where you're going to place your coffee cup or, I don't know, for anything. Like the first 3 sentences of your emails must be this, right? That's a little over the top. But somewhere in between no structure and rigid structure is enough structure to ensure repeatability of process and success in the organization while holding people accountable, without being all micromanaged, right? You're not trying to micromanage people. You're trying to make sure some level of accountability exists to account for the people that don't necessarily have self-accountability like you had just talked about.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting dynamic. I don't know. I'm talking all over the place, but because it's not an easy thing, right? You can't just say, well, here's the solution. I don't know that there's a solution. Every organization is different. Every culture is different. Every needs in an organization are different. But I think you have to strive to figure out the sweet spot of what needs to be rigid, controlled process and accountability, and what needs to be open and creative and artistic in terms of allowing people to be innovative, right? And I think there's a balance between those things. If you have zero structure, you're allowing people to be innovative, but they have no desire to do it necessarily. And then with some structure, maybe you're helping that creativity along, right? I think there's a balance to be had, but I think it's up to every organization to figure out what that is.
So I'm reminded of 2 things, and in 2 kind of perspectives as you're describing this. One, the self-awareness it takes for an individual as well as an organization. An organization itself has to have a level of self-awareness so that they can see and recognize things, essentially mitigate risk as it relates to how they operate culturally. And then the other thing is the autonomy that we hope to create for our employees, our team members, the people that are really getting it done on the shop floor, all the way to the top to bottom, all the way around. We want them to incorporate a certain amount of self-agency. They have to have those skills, that ability, and that, I guess, empowerment or autonomy, enough autonomy from the organization to say, here's your structure, stay in these guardrails. Here's 12 things we never do. Here's 6 things we're allowed to do. And here's the area where you can be creative. Go do your best work because we hired you because you have these skills.
And we can't get, so I love that. You are 1,000% correct. But I can't tell you the number of organizations or people that I talk to where they don't even know what their boss's goals are. They don't even know what the company goals are. They don't know what their manager's goals are. Their manager hasn't given them any goals. So they don't even know what the end goal looks like, let alone all the other pieces to what you had just mentioned, which are all critical, right? What can I do? What can't I do? When I do something, does it have a standard? All those things are incredibly important. But man, some of these folks, they don't even know what the objective is. I'm a recent organization I spoke to, a recent organization I'm working with. The company has specific projects to go create certain things. And there's a project going on that's consuming a whole team of people to go after an issue that, when we did the math, is an almost negligible issue. Meanwhile, when we do the math on where opportunity exists, there is just millions of dollars of opportunity in another area that this team should be going after. But instead of going after that, they're being tasked with things that somebody would like to see happen in the organization. And so the goals are misaligned to where the opportunity exists. I think that's another important factor, especially if the team knows what opportunities exist. It's almost diminishing to them to give them goals that have no real value to the business. Right. It's almost like you don't trust them to solve these more complicated issues. And so you're giving them simple things. Right. And you know, that happens as well.
Well,
I don't know. Our original topic was what makes that success factor between organizations with respect to accountability. Our first thing was self-accountability. And the second piece has to be the organization needs to hold itself accountable. So not only do the managers have to hold their direct reports accountable, but the whole organization has to have some self-accountability as to what its goals are and have some consistency in how it strives towards those goals. And we see that changing way too often. The goal is don't have as bad of a day as we had yesterday. That's not really a goal.
Well, it's the way you keep marching forward, and you have at least one thing that you're setting out to do today is to make today somehow better than yesterday. And at this point, sure, it's cliche, but when you affect these organizational changes, when you go in and you actually see the lights start coming on for those individuals, the teams, the leadership, and they're bought in, that takes a lot of work and effort by everyone, not just you and your team, but the organization itself. Then the kicker that's always just sitting in one of the corners of the plant or in somebody's office hiding behind a little trash receptacle that'll come out. It's this string they can get a hold of on that sweater of work that you did, and they can unravel it lightning fast.
Yep.
And it tends to take way longer to fix it. And at that point, because some key people left or some other person said, yeah, we're not going to do that initiative anymore because they don't realize the change they're about to make is going to further reduce OEE. For example, if that's the metric you measure by, could be many others. I would leave that to you, not me, being an expert, right? I think then those organizations are far less likely to go and do that again. They almost get a built-in kind of recoil to the improvements that are at their feet, and I think they know it, and they experience pain that they can't do it. They know they can't do it, and they know they need to do it. And I think that's hovering around everybody, maybe now more than ever before, because we have so many perceived easy buttons that aren't easy buttons at all. And that's where I'm kind of weaving in some of the technology where we always talk about you got lots of brilliant technology out there. They're tools. They can do great things. They can be historians. You can gather information in your CMMS, your EAM. You got condition monitoring and all this stuff. But without any of that other stuff, all that's bubkus. It's just a spend. And then they start thinking even more so that maintenance is a cost center rather than an investment in their business. And I think that's what we really all want to change. And we can only do it one person, one company at a time. And we also know that most times that's going to be temporary, aside from, I'm going to use the term world class, or maybe these organizations of excellence that adhere to those changes and say, we fixed this. We no longer go below this threshold and we do anything and everything possible. And that comes back to the accountability. People don't want to stand up and say, yep, this is what I did the last 3 months. This is where I struggled. This is where I screwed up. That last one, nobody seems to be willing to do that. And I want to switch our subject into relevance. How relevance has a negative impact on leadership roles and other roles within the organization, influencing people's behavior or lack of doing the right thing. Can you talk a little bit about that without hurting anybody's feelings?
No. So just one final statement on the standards and accountability piece. One of the ways you get to swap leaders and not have gigantic negative impacts is to have those standards in place, because it becomes how you do business. It's a lot harder to rewrite a standard operating procedure. If no operating procedure exists, you come in and put in whatever process you want. So a good reason to have that standard. I think leadership struggles for a lot of reasons, and a direct connection between the shop floor and transparent communication and what the goals are is a critical piece to a leader coming into an organization. Simply making change for the sake of making change is a gigantic negative, and unfortunately, the current climate of not having longevity in positions, whether they stay for 2 years and leave, or they, finish some project to be able to put it on a resume and they leave for whatever reason. We've talked about this before. Pensions are gone for the most part. No, there's not a lot of incentives for people to stay inside an organization anymore. And so the leader, they're irrelevant anyway because they're going to leave.
They're waiting for their next opportunity and how this looks good on my resume.
100% encompassing, right? I don't want to come off like nobody stays in their job for 30 years, because there certainly are people that stay at their place and have longevity. But the climate of today is that doesn't really happen. And in many organizations, that it's true that doesn't happen. People stay for a couple of years and they leave. And so if they want to look really good, they just cut a bunch of costs. It's temporary anyway. I'm not going to see the negative impact until after I'm out of here. And so they leave and the next person gets inherited a shit bag. And so that becomes what's critical. If you want to be relevant as a leader, you have to understand that irregardless of what you've inherited, you still have to see success. And that can be challenging, especially if the previous person was a person who just walked around cutting everything and tried to make himself look good and walked out the door. But I think that if you're honest and have honest communication and honest, transparent communication, the shop floor will tell you that that was the case. And they'll let you know what they did well before or didn't do well before. I think when leaders make giant mistakes is when they come in with an agenda. Like they don't come in and watch and listen. They come in with what they used to do or what worked at their previous company. Yes. And I think that's a huge, huge mistake. I think you have to get the pulse of the operation. You have to listen to the operators. You have to listen to the maintainers. You have to listen to those folks because the only way you get value from an asset is from those folks, right? The people in the offices and in the cubicles, they're not giving you value from the asset. The value from the asset comes from the people that operate it. And the only way they can operate it is if it's available to operate. And that comes from the maintenance folks. So there's this reliance on operations and maintenance that people deny. That they think that the corporate overhead and the office people are important and relevant, but a company doesn't really need those folks. If they all called out tomorrow, the plant would run and produce. If all the operators called out, it's not running.
That's right.
So companies buy assets to deliver a value. And the value they're expecting is on their About Us section of their website, right? We make these products. We want them high quality. We want people safe. All the commitments they have as a company. They buy assets to do that, whether the asset is the sprinkler system to keep people safe and to be in compliance with local code, or if the asset's a production asset, or the asset's a pump and you're a public utility and you want to keep everybody's costs down. You buy an asset to add value to the business. And the way you get the value from the business or from the asset is to operate it. And when it's not operating, you make no money, no value from the asset. And when it is operating, you have an opportunity to make value. In order for you to operate it, it has to be available. That comes from the maintenance department. In order for you to get the value, operations has to operate it well. Nowhere in that equation is the finance person needed to get their spreadsheet done today. And, and that's not to say they don't play important roles in the organization, but when you boil it down, when the company was first starting and they bought one packaging piece of equipment or they were packaging things by hand with the owner, they didn't need finance people. They only need finance people because they grew.
That's right.
And one person couldn't do the whole thing anymore. And what they did was they outsourced finance to an internal employee so they could keep operating the line.
Which is another risk
the line
in your
makes
business.
Money. Right. Because the line makes money.
Yeah. Yeah. And
you look at a company, we'll just say they started out in a farm and they're making their own product. The family's running the product through the machine, right? And then at some point, they've got to take care of the business and get sales and still run the machine. And they have to make a choice. They're either going to outsource running the machine and go do the sales themselves, or they're going to hire a salesperson so they can spend more hours running the machine. In either of those two scenarios, the central focus was the machine still needs to run.
No machine, no money.
Right. So the relevant piece here is to recognize that you're of service. It's to recognize that you're of service to the asset. You're not of service to anything else. The asset is what adds value to the business.
Yeah, and the asset doesn't care if you're having a bad day or a good day.
It doesn't give a crap about any of that. It doesn't care about your title, your position, how many years of experience you had. It doesn't care about any of that.
Yeah, the asset never says, "Hey, can you show me your degree?"
Yeah, it doesn't care. Yeah, it doesn't care.
But they do speak.
It needs the level of care that it needs, and that's it. And you're either going to give it what it needs or you're not. But you have to recognize that you're in service of the asset. If you don't see that you're in service of the asset, you're going to do a disservice to the organization.
Is this a common perspective in your view across the industry where there's more people that don't understand and accept and have that intention that you're here to serve the asset. Are there too many people that are in maintenance roles and maybe maintenance management roles that don't quite get that aren't really all about it? And I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose. I'm saying,
Right.
is that one of the major blind spots you've wrestled with for all these years now?
Yeah, no doubt. I think, and that's at all levels of the organization, including the maintenance folks, right? So I don't necessarily think that they all see that the asset exists to add a value to the business and that they are in service of making sure the value gets brought to the business. And they don't necessarily see it that way. When it breaks, I fix it. The PM comes out, I go do the PM. I get all that. But I don't know that anyone's really connecting them to the business. They feel like the redheaded stepchild anyway already, because they're a business unit that really doesn't have a seat at the table when you compare them to procurement and finance and safety and quality. And so they already feel left out of that boardroom, even though they belong there, because without the asset, there's no value. And then throughout the rest of the organization, that's a huge gap. I don't think that people, we went through a exercise at a plant recently. Procurement buys boxes, blanks. They buy blank car that gets shaped into a tray or a box. And when they come in off the truck and they are deformed, whether they were strapped too tight or they sat in a place that had temperature or humidity fluctuations for whatever reason, the carget is swelled or it's wrapped too tight and it's deformed, the line rejects it and kicks it out and says, we can't run this, and puts it in the back of the on hold. And the process is supposed to be procurement calls up the supplier and says, you need to take this pallet back. It's no good. We're not running it. I'm not paying for it. But that's extra work. So instead of doing that, they just leave it in the back room. And because they didn't return it, it sits in the inventory on the electronic system like they still have it. So they don't reorder carget when they should, because that pallet still looks like we have it and we can run it. And so when the carget gets low enough, the line is forced to run the bad carget. So when a line runs the bad carget, their OEE drops to 29%. And they lose $47,000 in an 8-hour shift of running the bad carget. The carget costs $750 for the pallet. So they save $750 so they can waste $47,000.
We talked about this at Streamline too.
So, but this is a good example for exactly what we're talking about. Procurement doesn't understand that they're in service of the asset. They're going, well, that's a bunch of extra paperwork for me. But if you brought people to understand how they impact the asset and the asset's reliability, your decision is costing this business $47,000
a day, or a shift,
right? Like a shift. So you can't make choices like that. You're not being held accountable to that choice, right? And our whole conversation started with accountability. Who's holding that person accountable for those choices?
Well, that should in fact be, we know for a fact the asset's going to hold you accountable one way or another.
Right, and it did. Yeah.
It should be leadership. And I'm going to spin this into a slightly different direction, and I'm leaning back into Streamline a little bit. When we were at Streamline, I got a chance to record with our dear friend Brian Bieski. And we got onto this topic that he really wanted to get into about organizations, especially technology companies, but it sounds like all these companies making stuff of any kind, they should have a chief maintenance officer or a chief reliability officer, because when you have that C-suite representation, and it needs to be a real one, someone that's got the experience. I don't care if they have a degree, and I'm kind of stealing Brian's words, but they can affect that awareness throughout the organization. They're there to keep an eye on that because that is their actual job. They can help everyone, including that person in procurement or that person in finance, to start to get it and understand, because they empower them with the real insights.
Yeah,
And
I think in most organizations they make the assumption that that I don't want to say that role, but that facilitation of expressing what the assets need is happening between operations and engineering at the table. But it doesn't, because they're not the expert. They're not really the expert in what an asset needs and how to take care of an asset.
right.
So it is misrepresented in the room 1,000%. Do companies need a chief maintenance officer? I don't know. I guess it depends on the size of the organization, but they certainly need somebody, for lack of better terminology, and to use the analogy of streamline and the theme there, to speak for the assets. Somebody has to be the advocate for the asset, right? And the asset's going to advocate for itself whether you like it or not. It's going to fail when it needs to fail, and it's not going to run right when you don't treat it right.
Yeah.
But somebody should be proactively doing that, and I think that's it's always been a giant gap. I mean, it's been a giant gap my whole career in most organizations, right? And I think I forget. I did a couple years ago. I looked up the Department of Labor and Statistics, and I looked up, well, how many manufacturing plants exist in the United States, and there's about 400,000, and there's about 7,000 reliability engineers.
Not enough. And then we have to question how deep the skill set goes, and are they really real reliability engineers? Because look, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just saying you got to know what you're getting. You got to work on that. That's why I don't try to take a role like that, because I'd walk in there going, yeah, I don't really know this shit.
We come across a whole bunch of them where they're kids out of college, and they got to start somewhere too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they're thrown into that position of reliability engineer, and they don't really have a reliability background, and there's no one there to coach and mentor them, and they're just kind of left on this island of, your job as the reliability engineer. And that's unfortunate, because those folks can really grow. That position didn't exist inside the company I ended up being that at, right? Like that title didn't exist until I got promoted into it. So at least they have a position that at the ground floor they can come into and grow and mold that, but they need to be educated, and they need to get experiences, and they need some mentorship. And without that, they just get put into the fold of who's doing what in the plant.
You read my mind.
Not necessarily dedicated to that.
Yeah, you read my mind. I was going to ask a two-part question. I was going to say, whatever happened to orientation, and where's the mentorship that I was accustomed to growing up, and even into my 30s, man, where I could find a mentor or two within an organization, regardless of what it was. I could find that for a project and get some guidance, like, hey, look, around that corner over there, that's no good. You don't have to go there. This is what happens over there. And more of that would make a difference. And the real mentors that we need, they're going away, and we don't have to belabor that. I mean, everybody knows skilled trades. There's, silver tsunami and all that stuff. And we're trying like heck to get people to document their processes, document what didn't work, document what worked, document why it worked, why it didn't work. This is all. And I try to kind of beg, borrow, and steal from what you and all the Real Deal pros do. You can apply root cause analysis to human assets and culture and those things. You might need to get a little bit creative, but it's all there for the taking. I want to try something a little bit new for this episode, for us to close out on it. And
it's not ink blots, right? You're not about to put up ink blots.
No, we're not doing Rorschach, none of that nonsense, man. For those it works for, hey, good, go do your Rorschach test and all that happy horse shit. But it's not horse shit. I love that stuff. But I want to ask, instead of the fun question segment I often use, which I can't put you through that because you already did that a couple years back. So I want to switch it up and just on the fly ask you a couple of point blank questions where you just give me a point blank answer, and I might riff from there. So,
all right.
Are there too many people in this industry overall, maintenance and reliability, that look and appear to be experts that are not?
I don't know that I'm qualified to judge other people's ability to be an expert in any specific topic.
Fair enough.
I would consider myself astute at maintenance and reliability, but I would not. If someone asked me questions about the specifics of how to be a journeyman millwright, I probably couldn't answer all the questions. Does that mean I'm no longer an expert? If someone asked me all the technical aspects of, say, Howard Penrose's electrical signature analysis, do I know the gist of what it's supposed to be doing? Yeah. Could I give you all the technical details he can? No. So did I suddenly no longer, am I astute at maintenance and reliability? I don't know that it's fair to judge. I understand the basis of your question. But if you're a good leader and a person that wants the best for this industry, I don't think bashing the industry is the way to go.
Okay.
I think that everybody has opportunity to become a better expert, and I think that they should strive to do that. I think it's unfortunate if someone presents themselves as an expert and they are not an expert. And I think it's unfortunate if they give people misinformation. I see dozens and dozens of posts on LinkedIn every day where people are posting something that just is not the way to do something, or misusing terminology. But I don't think that it is for me to judge that on a case-by-case basis, nor should I pretend that my knowledge and experience is the end-all be-all.
Well, and so the follow-up to this then is, let's lean in on this positivity that we have an opportunity right here, right now, and say, how can somebody, so I'm going to bring it full circle, how can somebody self-assess and develop a better awareness of where they sit in the overall scope of knowledge, experience, and maybe they want to go on that journey and say, you know what, I want to be better because I think there's opportunities for that. How would you suggest somebody effect that kind of a self-assessment that can create something actionable where they can go and improve?
Yeah, I think you try to educate yourself the best you can with a variety of sources, and then see how that applies, and if those theories shake out, and develop your own theories and see if they shake out. I think the struggle that we have in the consultant space specifically is if they've never actually had to do this work as a practitioner, they have no reference point of what did and didn't work. They only know the theory parts of it. So I think for the folks that have been practitioners, they can read other texts and work and use their own past experience to kind of shake out what sounds like horse crap and what might be a good theory. I think if all you've ever learned was the theory parts of it, that becomes a lot more difficult because you don't know what to believe or what not to believe, because you don't have any relevant experience to use as a litmus test. And I think that's probably where some people struggle. But my advice would be to read as much as you can, watch as much as you can, observe, listen, do all those things, and internalize that, and then see what shakes out. There are a variety of books you can read on a variety of topics, and they may say the same thing 12 different ways, or they may have 12 different ways to achieve the same thing. And in either case, you have to ascertain what's horseshit and what's not.
Yeah.
And some of it's the former.
Well, and I would only add to this, just as a general idea, because this works pretty well for me. Have conversations with people that somehow you have to be able to vet who you're talking to and who you're learning from, but those mentors and those people in the industry, because what I have found now, George, not just with you, not just with Joe Anderson, not just with Paul and Brian and Corey and Matt, and sorry for anybody I left out, have conversations and don't be afraid to be wrong, because if you have that level of vulnerability and your intention is to learn and improve,
Yeah.
You and all those individuals and the ones I don't even know on this earth, they will recognize it instantly, and they will pour into you guidance, and they
No doubt.
too will share their failures and stumbling moments throughout their careers that help them grow. So with that, first of all, George, I know you're out on the road doing some great work, but you made time for me this evening to do a recording. I want to thank you for being back on CMMS Radio, brother.
Awesome, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it all the time.
Absolutely. Go Dallas. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.